Hello everyone and welcome to my latest video, which would be communicating with empathy or empathetic communication. I'm not sure what to call it just yet, and this is pretty much following that sort of line of language related videos that I've been making. Some were on plain English, others were on grammar. I'm currently doing one on pronunciation, and it only feels natural to do one on communicating with empathy. I guess for a few reasons. Recently, I've been working with a hotline, a crisis support hotline. So very much that empathy in communication is sort of very key. I've done a couple of courses, so I guess that gives me a bit of background, but I've always had a strong interest in language and communicating effectively. And to be honest with you, like the internet is replete. Everyone is weighing in on empathy, sympathy. I even discovered there's a difference between empathic versus empathetic communication. And for those of you that want to know, empathic is a bit more of a clinical term, and empathetic is your common term. But anyway, let's start. Let's begin. And guys, I do apologize if I sound a bit congested, but it is winter. Winter is coming, definitely. But anyway, let's begin. So, look, my research has taken me to understand that the concept of empathy dates back to the 1880s when German psychologist Theodor Leps coined the term Einfühlung, which literally means in feeling. And then after that, American psychologist Robert Titchener is said to have coined the word empathy in 1909 as we know it, the English one. Empathy is basically the process of understanding a person's subjective experience by sharing that experience while remaining an observer, yeah, which would help when it comes to helping. It is the understanding of another person's experience from that person's frame of reference. So, authors and educators consider that empathetic communication is a teachable, learnable skill. So, look, this module will be an introduction to basic principles of empathetic communication, and it will hopefully provide you with practice to ensure that you have greater empathy when communicating. So, we will cover what empathy is and its different aspects. We will look at the difference between sympathy and empathy, and we will end on practical empathetic communication. Before I continue with this video, I need to just acknowledge four sources. The first being Mental Health First Aid USA Manual. Second being the work of Carla McLaren on empathy, which I will talk about later. The third is Psychiatric Medical Care, the difference between empathy and sympathy, which I'll also reference directly later. And one that I think permeates a lot of this video and was really very insightful was from the Permanent Journal, An Overview of Empathy by James T. Hardy. And guys, I'm going to record this bit, though I'm not really too sure if I can use it or not, even though I'm going to quote the source. But I found, and I'm always fascinated by neat ways of, I guess, explaining concepts that could be a bit more abstract. But anyway, this comes from a book called The Art of Empathy, a complete guide to life's most essential skill by an author called Carla McLaren. And she divides sort of the aspects of empathy into six things. The first one, either, and I'm going to try and paraphrase it as best as I can. The first one is emotion contagion. So I guess that just sort of speaks for itself, but it's basically the capacity to feel and share emotions. So if you feel something, then I will feel something. And then there's something else that she terms empathic accuracy. So this is our ability to accurately identify and understand emotional states in ourselves and in others. So I feel what you feel and I recognize it. And then there's one that's called emotion regulation, which basically, you don't want it to overtake you. So you must understand, regulate, and work with your own emotions in order to be able to cope and be in the presence of strong emotion. The fourth thing that she mentions is perspective taking. That would be that idea of you put yourself in their shoes, and therefore you may think, okay, well, what is it that they need? What is it that they want? And then you've got concern for others is number five. Clearly, you need to connect with others. You need to be concerned for them, their well-being, and you need to show compassion. Yeah, and that needs to come through. And the last thing that she mentions is perceptive engagement, which is basically all those things. Yeah, your ability to accurately identify the emotions of others, regulate your own, take the perspective of others, focus on them with concern, and then do something which may not really be something that you would do for yourself, but it's remember it's that thing of putting that other person first. And guys, we soldier on. Think of these as tips, and this comes from, again, another source. It's from the psychiatric medical care, which basically shows I've done a lot of research, quoting things that are reputable, I imagine. And these are American, as in North American, as in United States of America, huh? And it's adapted from psychiatrical, as I said, psychiatric medical care, the difference between empathy and sympathy. So this is sort of overlapping with it. And it is in itself quoting the mental health first aid, and it's tips for showing more empathy to someone who's experiencing crisis. But again, I will paraphrase these and I'll use a bit of what I've learned. The first one says listen without judgment, or if you want to put it, you can call listen without prejudice. Those of you that ex-Geners would really know that it's good old Gorgie Georgie of listen without prejudice. These are the days of. But look, listen without judgment is important because it's basically you want to understand what the other person's trying to say and connect with them by showing them that you understand how they are feeling and thinking. And you've got to be careful here that you may have biases that may affect your ability to listen without judgment. And you may have assumptions that you're going to make about how they may be feeling based on your own experience, which leads on to the next one, which says listen with intention. So basically, give the person that you're communicating with your full attention. Do not suddenly look at your phone and say, "Oh, look, sorry, what was it that you were saying?" Like a lot of people do when you're with them face to face. Avoid that if you can. Number three is very, very important. That idea of the difference between empathy and sympathy says listen without advice, don't give advice, because we often do that, don't we? We often, it's so easy to give someone advice, and I always used to think, what is going on there? And I realized it was because of the lack of emotional commitment to something. You know, someone's telling you a story, you're not emotionally committed, it's not happening to you, so it's easy to give advice. And apparently that's called the Solomon paradox, yeah, because it's just easier. So what we need to do here, and the problem with giving advice is that you end up making the person, you know, not only feel that they are in crisis, but kind of saying to them, God, you're a bit thick. Like it's so easy and clear what you're meant to do. I can see clearly now. And you end up coming across like Nicole Kidman, a post-feminist character that just speaks with such clarity and you know like understands very well what needs to be done. But anyway, look, what you need to do here is let the person talk, let them come to their own conclusions about what they should do, because after all, they are the experts in their own life. If they ask you for advice, you basically should ask them what they think they should do or what they've done before. Remember that you just want to reaffirm and empower them so they can feel good. And at the end of the day, we always end up doing what we want to do anyway. So it's good. It's almost like you're a sounding board. And the last one is listen with understanding. So affirm and accept what the other person is feeling,
even if you don't agree with them.
Okay, guys, the last bits, if you want, on the difference between sympathy and empathy. Remember that sympathy implies feeling shared with the sufferer as if the pain belonged to both people, in that we share the feeling and situation and suffer with them, like, oh, you know. It is also almost like a relief in not having the same problems, so there's a bit of condescension. Yeah. Um, Empathy is more concerned with engaged detachment. Remember, where you remain an observer. Yeah, you observe, feel, and understand another's feelings without taking them on because you need that ability to become Salaman and give that advice. No, remember, it's not about giving advice. It's about, maintaining that sounding board. But by being a practical observer, we understand how the other person feels, and then we remove ourselves from that feeling and situation so we can help the other person. Remember, help the other person is just basically saying, come on, we can do this. I'll cheer you on, but never taking the lead yourself and saying, I think this is what you should do. Just follow my lead. Empathy involves both identifying to understand while at the same time, and you're going to like this, distancing yourself so as not to take on the suffering. What do you think? Okay, let's move on. This is a direct quote from Mental Health First Aid USA manual. But it says most people experiencing distressing emotions and thoughts want an empathetic listener before being offered helpful options and resources. Okay, so look, some things that we can do. The first one is recognizing the presence of strong feelings and not being afraid to say them. Yeah, we don't need to sugarcoat anything. You can say, look, I can sense that you feel fear, anger, grief, disappointment. You are outraged. Say it. Yeah. Sometimes what I've learned from my stint in what I'm doing is sometimes if you reflect a stronger feeling like you are horrified, the person might say, okay, hold on, take it easy. It's not that bad. But anyway, try and not shy away from that. There's that idea of pausing to imagine how the person might be feeling. And remember, then you state your perception of their feelings. I can imagine that that must be, or it sounds like you're upset about, because basically you're legitimizing, you're validating that feeling, um, respecting the person's effort to cope with whatever they're going through, to see that they're already doing something about it. And if you were to offer support and empowerment, that idea would be, would you like me to? Or would you be interested in trying something? Or so do you want to talk it through? So look, some things that we can do when we're querying the person, we can say things like, can you tell me more about that? Or what has this been like for you? How has all of this made you feel? What has this been like for you? How are you feeling about it? When you want to clarify, you would say something, look, let me see if I've gotten this right, blah, blah, blah. Tell me more about what you were saying there. And look, I want to make sure I understand what you've said. Am I right in thinking that this is what you mean? And the responses that you can give would be things like, sounds like you are feeling very taken for granted, or I imagine that that must be disheartening or dispiriting. You must be heartbroken. Yeah. I can understand that that must make you feel unwanted. I can see that you're very upset by that. It must be hard for you to have that happen, and this is a really challenging time for you. I can see that. Ideally, after hearing a statement of empathy or response, the person will express agreement or confirmation, like saying, that's right. Yeah, that's exactly how I feel. And when we haven't understood what the person is saying or experiencing exactly, we've got to create a space where they can correct our perception. And there's something here that's called the hypothesis test feedback loop, which basically allows the person to clarify his or her experience and thus allow us to restate the empathetic statement that we originally missed and see if we got it right. So I'll give you an example. The person could say something like, I'm tired of living like this. No one has been able to help me, and none of my medications are working. And you can just say, look, I can see that you're feeling very frustrated by the lack of improvement in your anxiety. And then the person would say, look, yeah, but I'm more worried about the effect this is having on my wife and kids who depend on me financially. So this is an opportunity for you to correct yourself, and you would say something. So it sounds like you're really more concerned that your anxiety will stop you providing for your wife and kids. And the person might close the empathy loop by saying, yes, exactly. You restate the hypothesis back to the person who lets you know that, yeah, you got it right. Thanks. I'm glad. I feel heard. So guys, we can try another example. I'm not really going to go that far. I'm going to use my own situation, and I'm going to be the person in crisis, and I'm going to give you a moment so you can summarize how I'm feeling. So I'll say to you something like, I'm so over it. I'm just so burnt out because I've been looking for work and I've had 700,000 rejections. I feel like I don't know what to do. All right, what would you say to me? And then, guys, whatever you've said to me, which I'm not really going to know what, um, and then I'm going to say to you something like, yeah, but what I'm more worried about is that I won't be able to keep up payments of my mortgage. And now that I have Bob, it won't be that easy for me to find a place if I wanted to rent it. Or I'm just worried about what will happen there. Will we be homeless? Okay, now tell me what you think, without necessarily giving me advice. And I will say to you, hopefully, if you say, look, you're worried that if you don't find a job and you run out of money, you're not going to have anywhere to live. And I'll say to you, yes, yeah, yeah, I am. And then you will say something to me like, okay, what might you do, or what are you thinking of doing? And I'll say to you, look, I'm going to uh, branch out and see if I can get work doing other things and making money other ways, other forms of income. And look, if worse comes to worse, I see myself running out, I'll just rent this place out and just buy a van before all of my money goes out and just live in the van with Bob. I guess that's not being homeless. That would be having a mobile home. And there you go, guys. And not only is Bob not your uncle, Bob's your dog, and Bob could be my wingman. Bob's my wingman. Well, what do you know? We've reached the end. And earlier, as like at the start, I wasn't too sure what to call it, but let's go with communicating with empathy, what to do, because that will lead to the sequel, communicating with empathy, what not to do. And it will include several things, that idea of moving away from generic communication, definitely. And I will be able to include something that a friend of mine has been asking me to do for a long time, which is make a video on my experience with recruiters and going through job interviews, and just that whole idea of the way rejection is communicated. Some of the catchphrases that you can sort of see a mile off. But anyway, look, just to recap what we've done with communicating with empathy, what to do. The main takeaways would be, remember to make it about the other person, to fully respect their experience, and to also respect their ability to overcome whatever they're going through, and that you are mainly there as a sounding board and to remind them, I guess, of their strength, if you like, or for them to bring it out while talking to you. And hypothesis test, feedback loop, uncovering what is the real issue, which is often not articulated or may not come out straight away. So by doing that, we may uncover what the real issue is. Thank you for watching, everyone, and see you soon.